Okay. So everybody, welcome to our NF2 schwannomatosis meetup for April. You may have noticed that this one was added to the calendar, and we're very excited. We have a really fun special guest here with us tonight. So before we get to that conversation, I just want to do a little housekeeping. Closed captions are available by a live captioner this evening. You just need to click on the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please remember to keep your microphone muted so that everyone can hear the presenters. We are recording this event, so please feel free to keep your camera off if you do not want your image to be recorded tonight. We encourage everyone to introduce themselves in the chat. If you go over to that chat and tell us where you're from and what your connection is to NF2, we would love to see that and see some of the connections that you might find someone who lives a little bit closer to you than you thought. And please also tonight, we're encouraging you to use the chat to ask your questions. We will really only be able to take questions from the chat tonight in order to make time for as many questions as possible when we get to the Q&A at the end. So you can feel free to put those in chat at any point during our conversation. We have a CTF staff worker who's going to keep track of those and be able to ask those when we get to the end of our conversation. So, having done the housekeeping, I'm very excited to introduce our speaker for this evening. So Matt Hay, who may be familiar to many of you, is a frequent speaker of lessons learned during his 25 years of living with NF2-related schwannomatosis. Matt shared his story on an NPR podcast that was titled Soundtrack of Silence. And that segment ended up creating interest in a potential movie about the story of Matt's life, which then also became a book. And he recently released his memoir just earlier this year. Matt is a past member of the Children's Tumor Foundation Board of Directors, and he's currently working toward his doctorate in public health. He also is working with Alexion as the U.S. Director of Patient Advocacy for NF and supporting the mission of patient advocacy groups like CTF and the launch of the first FDA-approved medication for treating types of NF tumors. Matt lives in Westfield, Indiana with his wife, his 3 children, and as he says, some very opinionated labradoodles. So we're very excited. Welcome, Matt. We're going to do this like a little book talk. So I'm going to ask Matt questions, and he is going to just share a little bit with us about the process of writing a book and his story of living with NF2. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Kate. I didn't really know what to expect tonight, but it's so great to see so many of you that I know. I really didn't know who all would join, and so some of you I saw as recently as a week ago, which was wonderful, and then a lot of other names of people on here that I stay in touch with. So thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah, that's great. It is fun. We saw a lot of these faces a week ago at our NF Summit, right? So fun. Okay, so let's get started. Matt, I've heard you say to me in conversation that you almost didn't write this book. So can you tell us a little bit more of the story of what was holding you back and what was the thing that eventually pushed you into going for it?
Sure. And I think the way I will try to take this is basically share with you guys questions I would have had or would have loved to have asked someone 5 years ago when I started writing a book. A little bit of curiosity of just how the process works. What about it surprised me? What was great? What wasn't so great? But I think I'll start with why I almost didn't write it, which is there's a certain level of like self-centeredness and egotisticalness to say my life is worthy of a book, and I'm not totally convinced my life is worthy of a book. I think that we all have probably 272 interesting pages of life that we could put on paper, and so I don't think there's anything particularly special about me. Just kind of some hard work and being in the right place at the right time and having a chance to tell my story. I've heard so many stories from you guys that I think we all probably have a book in us somewhere. But when you actually sit down to start, like, page 1, this is my book and I'm going to put this out into the world, it just felt very self-centered, especially It's not, I'm not writing an interesting story about a thing. I'm writing about me under the assumption that you are going to sit down to want to learn about me. And I was really, it's a very unnatural feeling for me. Um, so I kind of put that off a little bit. I had written some stories that I shared. My kids once asked how their mom, my wife, and I met, and I thought, well, that's kind of a neat story. I like to write. I'll write about that. But that's entirely different than writing 80,000 words or whatever. Um, so there was one that actually involves NF advocacy, and I think we're all in this together enough that nobody's feelings are going to be hurt by saying I was at it wasn't a CTF event, um, but at the time it was an event it was National Neurofibromatosis Foundation being involved with work from the NF network. And it was in Chicago, and it was the first advocacy event I ever went to. And I turned around, I walked in, and I turned around to leave. And I'm gonna guess some of you felt this way at some point when you've been to an advocacy event, or maybe it's a reason you haven't been to an advocacy event. And I shared part of this story 2 years ago at the summit. I walked in and I was like, man, I'm not ready to be here. It's all I can do to get through my own stuff. I'm learning to adjust to my implant. My balance is bad. And I walked in and I thought I didn't need to see all these other people and be reminded of where other people are doing better than I am or where other people are doing worse. I just wasn't ready for that. And there was a mom that walked in behind me and asked if I had NF. And I said, yeah, I have NF too. And she said, kind of looked me over real quick and said, I'm so glad you exist. And it was a pretty heavy thing. No one had ever told me, I'm so glad you exist. But it's not even a compliment. She wasn't saying like, oh, I'm really glad to meet you. You're this really nice guy. Or she wasn't, hey, you're rotten. I was hoping I wouldn't see you when I was here. Um, so it wasn't really a compliment. It was just this was a mom who was also at her first event with a newly diagnosed kid, and she had never really thought about her kid being 30 or 35 or driving a car or being at a Chicago event on his own. And I share that story because that was a pretty big turning point where I was just starting to think about sharing my story and thinking, is it selfish to put this out there? But that day of meeting that mom at an NF advocacy event convinced me that it was probably selfish of me to not share my story because other people need to hear what I have been through, and they need to hear what isn't as bad as you think it's going to be, what's way worse than you think it's going to be, and then what's just kind of normal. I didn't have that. I'm just looking at a number here, and I can't believe there's 32 people on this call. I would have traded everything I had the day I lost my hearing to be able to have a captioned video call with 32 people and say, hey, this sucks. What did you guys do in this situation? And I didn't have that. And so having somebody say, Matt, I'm so glad you exist was the reminder that I needed of people out there that need to hear this story. Not because it's better or worse than their experience, but to know we're not alone, that it takes a conference call like this to get 32 people connected to NF2 together. And I needed to know at a time that there were 32 other people out there that exist. And so that was a big switch for me. The selfish thing wasn't writing the book. The selfish thing was having something that could maybe make someone else's life 0.1% better. Shame on me if I have an opportunity to do that and I chose to watch Game of Thrones instead. So that was a big moment for me, even 10 years ago, where I thought I could put this on paper. And at that point, I just needed to find somebody who would ask me to write a book. So that's kind of a long answer to that question, Kate.
No, that was wonderful. And it actually leads really well into the next question. I should have started with the fact maybe that I read your book and that I'm a big fan. I was already a friend and coworker of yours, but now have become a fan of your book as well. I read a lot of memoirs. It's one of my favorite genres. And there was a sentence right in the beginning of your book that really struck me and stayed with me throughout your story. And it's when you wrote, like millions of people in the world today, I live on the edge of that roofline, a world where the promise of technology keeps hope alive, while the frustrations of loss tap me on the shoulder like a steady rain. And it really, the imagery there is incredible. And like I said, it stayed with me, especially when you wrote about your decision to get the ABI. And I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit about what the ABI is for those who maybe are not familiar, why you decided to try it, and kind of what your experience with it has been like.
Um, yes. So I this feels very weird, but I still get emotional hearing somebody else read something I wrote for a couple of reasons. Is one, I still can't believe I got to write a book. And so it's very surreal for me to hear somebody read back to me something I wrote, but also it wasn't easy sometimes to get into the mindset of I knew that the second something in this book is fake or a made up emotion of like how I probably should feel, or hey, I'm going to make this seem harder or a bigger deal than it really is. The second I do that, this is not a book I'm going to be proud to write, and so I know where I was. I know where I was sitting when I wrote that. I know how I was feeling when I wrote that, and so it's still unexpectedly emotional to hear somebody read it back. And it was absolutely where I sometimes, and maybe you guys with you've had hearing aids or a cochlear implant or an ABI, where we're sort of stuck between worlds of I hear too well to people forget that I can't hear. People forget I forget every day that I'm deaf because I hear well enough. But then when people forget, they also think sometimes I'm ignoring them or not paying attention or not. And so I feel a little bit, I don't know if I'm part of the hearing loss or deaf community or if I'm part of the hearing community. And, um, and so I do feel a little bit stuck. When I mentioned the technology, and I even started this about, 32 of us on a call, I think we can all appreciate um, not very many good things came out of COVID, but one of them is how long did Skype fail to have good video conferencing? And between the time COVID hit and the time COVID ended, the fact that I'm on a video call in high definition in real time with real time closed captioning, and we can record this and share it, and I can see, a scroll of real time questions come up. I'm processing all of that through an implant powered by a tiny little battery on a laptop. The amount of technology that goes into all of that happening so that I can be having a conversation with you guys is mind-boggling. I mean, I don't even know what I don't know about that. So I say this sometimes as a joke, but it's not. It sounds like a joke, but it's not. There's never been a better time in history to be deaf. Um, I mean, I'm 47 now, but it it still feels new to me that TV shows are all captioned, and that wasn't the case even a decade ago. When YouTube first started coming out, let me close the door. The dogs are letting you know they're there. Um, when when YouTube first came out, saw a lot of stuff online was not captioned, and so now my life is just measurably easier because of all of these free access to technology that I use every day. I mean, I know a lot of you guys use Otter or other real-time captioning apps. My life is so much easier because of those, and so sometimes I take it for granted. But um, I do still feel stuck in between. But certainly the technology and the things that we have available to us, or the things I have available to me, hopefully that you guys have available to you, um, from an equity standpoint, the fact that Otter has free service, Zoom has a free service, um, a lot of that makes things easy to do and affordable, which is a big part of what I hope to do in advocacy is making things accessible to everybody. Um, and then going back to just one thought on the book is certainly this room is a little bit different because I don't get a chance to talk to other people living with NF. So you guys get it. you guys get it in a way that most people in our lives outside of this conversation maybe don't. Um, so yes, the book is about NF2 and my experience of having bilateral acoustic neuromas and losing my hearing and getting an ABI and having kids through IVF and PGD and all of these acronyms. Um, I hoped though that the book, no offense to you guys, but I wanted to sell more than 32 copies of the book. So if I made it specific just to NF, um, it would, I didn't want what I hoped to share to only be read by the NF2 community. I wanted to hopefully represent all of you in a way that you could be proud of or not disgusted by. um, but represent the NF community in a positive way, specifically the NF2 community in a positive way, but also share experiences that aren't just specific to NF2. And I mention that because I think a lot of people probably feel stuck between two different worlds. Maybe it's economically, maybe it's socially at school, maybe it's racially, maybe it's with religion, maybe I feel like a lot of us at some point in our life feel like you have one, one foot on one side of a thing and one foot on another. So I hope to be able to share some stories that and experiences that could be relatable way beyond just living with a disease that impacts, what, 1 in 40,000 or whatever. So I hope as you're reading it, this group says, here's how, I can relate that to my own life, but also maybe beyond NF2 that this helped me think about something. So that was the two, as I sat down and started putting this all together, the two things that I thought about a lot are if I started going on a tangent and I wasn't sure if this was book material or not, the question I would ask myself is, would this have made 25-year-old me's life better? Would reading this have helped? And if the answer to that was yes, then it stayed on the book material list. If um, if it was no, then I bumped that out. Are you guys? I'm seeing that you guys okay with my connection?
So every little while it slows you down, but then it seems to
Kate, are
pick
you okay?
up again. Yeah. So I think it's something on your end, Matt, but overall I think we're doing okay. It's just every little
Okay.
bit. Okay.
Uh, so the one was, is this a book I needed to read? And then the second was, is this story going to be only specific to like 8 people? Because that's just if you want to have an impact, you try to do that as big of a scale as possible. So I thought if this is a story, even if it's very specific to an auditory brainstem implant, how can I make it larger about communication, not just hearing loss, but communicating with people you love?
I love that. I love that. And actually, that you just really set us up beautifully for my next question, which is that there's an element in your story that I think is absolutely applicable, regardless of what someone might be going through in their own life, which is that a really important thread in your story is, of course, your lovely wife, Nora. In the book, it really is as if Nora had been with you always, like from the beginning, is the way that you talk about her. So I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about the power of finding that support network in your life, and how that's had an impact for you in your journey with living with NF2 and hearing loss and all that has come with that.
Sure. So great question, because Nora did not want me to write the book. Um, it's like you're sharing a lot of. She knows I'm very comfortable being open about my life and just in general. I mean, if you ask me how I'm doing, you better be prepared to learn how I'm doing, because I don't just usually say fine. And Nora will remind me that sometimes people just want to hear fine. Um, and I share a lot of very personal things about our life and our relationship and some struggles that we had in our relationship and some really difficult moments in our life. Um, I signed up to do that. She did not. And so there was a lot of trust on her part. I just think about, if you guys have ever had an argument with anybody, 5 minutes later, your version of that argument is probably way different than the other person's version of the argument. She trusted me to share only my side of the story of some really major things in our lives 20 years after they happened. And she had no opportunity to offer a counterpoint. And so I gave her a draft of the book to read, and she got through the first page, and she's like, "There's about 3 things in here that I don't think are right." And I thought, this is not going to end well if it's her critiquing or sharing her side in real time. So she finally just accepted that I was going to do my best to remember things as accurately as I could. So there was a lot of trust, and the dedication is to her and my family for giving me the space and the trust to be able to represent their story too. Um, and so she didn't read the book until after it was done, which was terrifying. She gave it a stamp of approval, but pointed out there were a few places where she remembered things differently. Um, and she still did not like having the spotlight on her. She was uncomfortable having friends say, "Oh my goodness, I did not know about this part of your life." She's like, "Well, there's a reason you didn't know about that. It's because I don't go around talking about it." Um, so she was very uncomfortable with having that kind of attention. And until one day, she overheard me sharing an example of who she is in my life and representing my support network. Um, I think or hope we all have a different version of Nora. Nora's my wife. She's my version of a support network, and she makes my life easier, whether it's phone calls, doctor appointments, reminding me to take medication, uh, doing laundry, making sure the kids are fed, all of the like million things that we rely on a support network to do. That once Nora stopped thinking about, hey, this book is about her, it is more about the what she represents. And then she's a real person, but bigger picture, she represents a support network that I needed. And so I hope, I hope everybody in the world reads the book. And I hope the second you're done, you don't think about me or Nora again. My hope is you get done and you think, hey, I liked that. That was worth my time. It really made me reflect on how I treat my mom or brother or daughter. Um, and if it prompts you to thank someone for support they are giving you that maybe you haven't thought to thank them for, um, that would be the best compliment you could ever give me, or the best reflection of the book that I could possibly imagine. Um, because Nora's certainly not in this for your gratitude or to think that she's this doting wife. Um, and I'm, I love hearing that people enjoy the book, but I didn't write it to get that accolade. I wrote it, and I hope that you guys, that it somehow can make somebody's life a little bit better, different, or make them think about things in a different way. Um, there's so much going on at my house. Um,
We can't hear anything that's happening in the
Kate,
background, so
why
it
don't
might
why
sound
don't
loud.
you ask another? Kate, ask another question, and I'll unmute. You're on mute.
My gosh, how embarrassing. Apologies, guys. What I was saying is that we can't hear any of your background noise, so don't worry too much about it. But okay, let's go to the next question. So I found out that you decided to record the audiobook for Soundtrack of Silence yourself. And as someone who is deaf and using the ABI, having read your book and listened or learned how hearing works at least a little bit when you have an ABI, I thought that was a really interesting choice. And so I wanted to ask, what was that experience like recording the book yourself? And was that a hard decision to make, or were you eager to do that yourself? Yeah, and just kind of what was that like?
Sure. So I was flattered that they wanted to do an audiobook as well, because that is not always the case. And then I was surprised that they asked me to do it because Macmillan Audio is like Obama level production, and not being humble or self-deprecating or anything. There is a reason people go in to do voiceover work as professionals. Some voices, there are actually people that will sign up, and I don't. This won't surprise you. I don't. Maybe some of you are in the same boat. I don't listen to audiobooks, and so I didn't know this, but some people pick the books they listen to based on the narrator, not the author. So there are famous audiobook narrators because people just find their voice and storytelling so appealing. I did not want the audiobook to suffer because me, somebody who is not a professional voiceover artist, was doing the recording. And beyond that, I don't know what I sound like. You know, I'm the second my implant comes off, I'm deaf, and so like any of you that either have or maybe have tried an ABI, things sound very robotic and muffled, and um, so I have worked very hard with um, speech and hearing therapy to try to maintain my enunciation and maintain clarity in the way that I speak, but I don't really know what I sound like. And so I declined the opportunity because I wanted it to be, I wanted to make sure they were really thinking about having what it means to have a deaf guy narrate a book. And they came back and said in a very polite way, we found a bunch of audio of you before we asked. And even though you're not a professional narrator, we think that it matches the tone of the book to have, because it is so first person. So a funny thing about doing audiobooks is they said I had a 3-week window to record it, and it's 8 hours um, of trying to have high energy and be clear and the same speed and the same tone. And it's hard to do that reading out loud by yourself while having an audio engineer listen in over Zoom. So they shipped me all the material, and I did this in my mother-in-law's. She has a loft in her house, and so I went to her, turned off the heater so it wouldn't kick on while I was recording, and I recorded at their house. But after I signed the contract to agree to do this, afterward I learned that it takes 3 hours to record one finished hour. So I thought I was signing up for 7 or 8 hours to record the book. I was actually signing up for 21 to 25 hours because sometimes you have to re-record a part. Sometimes you learn that you have been mispronouncing a word your whole life and you have to go back. I make some references to Greek mythology in the book, and I never once give any thought to how in the world to pronounce those people's names. But now that you're actually writing a book and saying it out loud, I want to make sure I get it right. Um, and then here's a funny thing, ending a chapter. If you're reading your book and you get to a chapter end and you finish a sentence, if you don't end with some kind of like finality, you have to go back and redo it. So I had to redo the last page of every single chapter because I would finish the book and finish a chapter and realize it was the end. And be like, oh no, I need to go back and end with some kind of authority or emotion or uh, So, and sometimes I would just get through a part that I was reading, and I'd get emotional reading it out loud. Um, and I wrote about my dad dying and my father-in-law dying, and you get emotional talking about it. But as a listener, they don't want to hear my voice cracking, talking about something because my emotion, the whole point is your emotion as a listener. Um, and so there were times, and then sometimes you just need to take a break because you get tired of talking to yourself for over 21 hours. Um, but in the hindsight now, after having been through all of that, I mentioned I lost my dad. If I'd had the opportunity to have 8 hours of my dad professionally recording some of the most important parts of his life, if he had a chance to do that and he turned it down, I would have been really disappointed. Um, and it also, in hindsight, would have been really weird to have some strange dude talking about falling in love with my wife or how much he loves my children. So, when you think about it that way, I'm really glad that I did it. When I had this isn't a question question is kind of a answer a question you had previously. When I got done writing the book, the first 80% of it is super fun. The first 80% of it is, they told me they wanted 80,000 words.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to do that. So I just thought very practically, I cannot sit down and write 80,000 words about anything. So if I can write maybe 2,000 words, I can do that. I can sit down and write 2,000 words about meeting my wife or how I felt the first time I couldn't hear my child cry. If I could, so going back in my life all the way back to the second grade, what are these big moments in my life? And can I come up with 40 things in my life, roughly one a year from starting at age 7?
Mhm.
And so I just outlined what are my senior year. Though it's saying my connection is unstable too.
Oh, is it saying that? I mean, we can still hear you. There's just a little pause every once in a while, but then you just keep right on going. So I
Okay.
think, okay.
So I thought if I can write 2,000 words about 40 meaningful things, I can put those together. So the first 80% was that.
Mhm.
The last 20% was not fun, and it took me almost twice as long. So it took me about 2 years to write the first 80%, and then it took me another almost 2 years to write the last 20% because I submitted it to my editor, and I thought I know there's two areas that I kind of cut a corner on here. And my editor said, Matt, there's two areas that you cut a corner here. And she immediately identified the same things that I knew I was not completely honest about. Um, One is, she said, you make Nora seem too good. So I had to literally go back and make Nora not seem as good. And, but like that, which is not an easy task, but her point. And I was like, why would you think that? And she's like, well, she's not very light as a woman. My editor was a woman. She's like, as a woman, Nora says and does the right thing every time. And that's not a very relatable thing that other wives are going to want to like read. And so she said, it's, I don't want you to just make stuff up, but I, let's think about ways that we can make, your relationship a little bit more real. And so I went back and I had to, and not had to, but on her advice, I thought about that. And so, um, it's fun to share stories about doing an Ironman. It's not fun to share and be really honest about how a struggle we had in our relationship where we stopped really being friends. We got so busy with my health and raising kids and jobs that we lived in the same house and we were kind of going through the motions, and we still loved each other like, you might love your favorite uncle or cousin, but we weren't really friends anymore. We weren't the person the other one turned to share like a really great thing that happened in their life. And I probably knew that was happening, but it's a totally different thing to put that on paper and share that. And so I went back and added that, and it's not fun. It's not fun to talk about it right now, but it's in the book, and I think it made the book better because it was more real. But I think it all my editor thinks it made Nora a little bit more likable because a wife reading it can think I knew it couldn't be perfect all the time, and it's not perfect all the time. So the other thing she said is, you make the hard stuff not seem very hard.
Mm.
And it's not because it wasn't hard. It was because the coping mechanism, the way I got through the hard stuff was not focusing on it and just kind of going on to the next thing and moving on to the next thing. That showed up in the book as well. Um, the um, So I wanted to make sure the book accurately reflected hard stuff.
Mm.
And so that meant going back. And here's the way she explained it, which I thought was great. You want a book to take people on an emotional journey.
Mm.
And if you don't make the hard stuff very hard, you're going from here to here. But if you make the hard stuff real, not fake it, not make it seem harder than it really is, but make it real, You take people on more of an emotional journey, and that makes for a better book, a better story, a better movie. And so I had to go back and make the hard stuff not fake, but I had to make it harder, and that's not fun either. Um, but she was right. That was my coping mechanism. She's like, Matt, you woke up paralyzed and couldn't walk for 6 months, and you summarized that in the book in 3 sentences. I have to think there's more than 3 sentences worth of material there. Um, and so one particular part of the book I wrote about that I thought, well, here was one of the lows was, and I can tell you guys because some of you can relate to this. The lows for me were waking up deaf, waking up without being able to smile, and then when Nora and I were dating and I was recovering from a spine surgery and paralyzed, we're dating. I'm trying to impress this girl, but I'm in a long-term care rehab facility. Um, so it's not exactly the place to show like strength and, um, having proving to her that I'm somebody that she can rely on in life. And so while I'm trying to impress her in whatever way, whatever dumb ways guys think they have to impress girls, instead of doing that, she'd be with me in a long-term care facility during visiting hours. And once a day, twice a day, she'd have to leave the room when nurses would come in to carry me to the toilet.
Mhm.
And then they would let her know how everything went in the bathroom. And then they would carry me back to a bed. And I, you just did the opposite of everything that I'm trying to convey to this person, that I can provide for you and I can be strong and care
Mhm.
for you. And I'm the opposite of all of that. Um, to put that down on paper was not fun or easy. And even if I could, to be in the right mindset, and then to do it in a way that is also hopefully good writing and ties in with the rest of the book, um, is is hard. So that whole part took me almost. That's why the last 20% took the same amount of time as the first 80%. But I would encourage you guys. Certainly not here tonight to give advice, but if you guys are ever thinking about putting something on paper, what worked for me is to put all of my ego aside and say, what's the most honest I can be? Um, whether that's good or bad, whether it makes for good writing or bad writing, I just, my experience through the whole book and speaking, and even today now, the more I leaned on just being super straight up, this is exactly what my experience was, no holds barred. The more I do that, the more people seem to respond, or I don't want to say enjoy it, because I don't know that even for you guys, I don't know if this is fun, but hopefully you take away more from it than if I just said, hey man, writing a book was awesome. Like, there were parts, but there were also parts that were really hard. Um, and I think if you're thinking about putting something on paper, do it. Self-publishing books is easier than it has ever been. It doesn't need to be a memoir. It could be a series of short stories. I thought if I went into this and the only people that read it are my mom and my kids, then it will be worth it.
Mhm.
Um, maybe it's maybe it's 5 lines,
Mhm.
and maybe you're more of a lyric writer or a poet. The answer doesn't have to be writing a book,
Mhm.
or writing 80,000 words.
I love that. I think, and I was gonna kind of my final question for you before we open it up to everyone's questions that have been in the chat. You've kind of answered this, but I want to ask directly and give you the chance to really respond, which is, what is your kind of your greatest hope, and maybe there's more than one, for what readers, whether they're part of the NF community or not, might take away from having, read your book and heard your story?
Um, well, and I mentioned before, if this can maybe, uh, it's what I needed. So if any of you ever read this, and even if it's one line, I mean, I don't pretend to think there's 272 pages of like genius at work there. Um, but if there's one sentence that makes you think, okay, I can relate to this, this is going to help me explain my hearing loss to somebody else in a way I couldn't before. This is going to help me. This prompted me to thank my mom and dad in a way that I had not thought to thank them before. Um, if there's anything like that that you can take away from this and make it your own, that would be the best gift anybody could ever give me. I mean, like I said, I love hearing that people enjoy the book, but um, if you make it about you and not me, that's the that would be my hope. Um,
Yeah.
and again, it doesn't have to be a book, but how great for any of us, what a privilege to have an opportunity to put something out in the world, whether it's a book, a song, a speech, showing up at an advocacy event, to be able to do something in the world that helps lighten the load for somebody else. Um, I mean, man, what a gift that is.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I'm gonna unspotlight myself, and then Emily, who's been keeping track of questions, is gonna ask you a few questions from our audience. You ready, Emily?
Yes, yeah. So Matt, we have a question here from Rima in the chat. What was it like to collaborate with a co-writer on this memoir? And I'll add, I'm not sure if you had a co-writer, but I'll have you answer that.
Yeah, sure. So this is a fascinating thing about the book industry, or at least it was to me. I probably annoyed them by asking a lot of questions on like the business of a book. First of all, if you work with a publisher, they keep most of the money, like most of the money. So that's what I say. Like, there's nothing wrong with self-publishing because um, publishers, they put the book out there, they print it, so you don't have any expenses. But you also, there's not a whole lot of revenue. I mean, there's a reason the only people you see making a full-time go of writing a book have names like J.K. Rowling and Stephen King. Um, so when I submitted the book proposal, um, I was asked, "Do you know how to write a book proposal?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And while I was on the phone, I was Googling how to write a book proposal. And so I got some ideas and I submitted it to 20 different publishers. And this is one of those stories you hear a lot. First 19 said no, and then 20th said yes, and then the 21st come along and said yes. Um, but I felt pretty comfortable that I could write a 2 or 3 thousand word story. The publisher wanted a memoir. I do not know how, I don't know enough about literary devices to be able to tie in 40 different stories into one. Like me, where do you stop and explain what an ABI is? Where do you stop and explain the science behind IVF? I'm not an expert at that. So I shared that with the publisher and they said, we would strongly recommend you having a co-writer. I said, okay. Uh, I don't know how that works. And they said, well, you could have somebody write the whole book for you. And there are people out there, ghostwriters, that they just meet you and you send them whatever you want to send and they write a book about you. I was not comfortable doing that. You can also write the whole thing yourself and just have a co-writer review it and make edits. I said, I want this to be the best as it can be, and I have no ego about it. So my criteria for a co-writer would be I only want my name on the cover. So I want to write enough that it's not like Matt Hay with so and so, because I didn't want people wondering, so did you write this or did that person write it? And I wanted final say in everything. I wanted to write everything and I wanted him to edit or help with what I wrote. And he said, okay. So there's contracts based on that. So based on the control I wanted to have and the involvement with him, we worked out a percentage where he gets a percentage of book sales, and based on the amount of work that he did. So what I did and so then I interviewed a co-writer and I didn't like him at all. I was like, there's no way this person gets what I'm doing. So I interviewed 5 different co-writers based on recommendations from the editor. And I finally found a guy that lives in Atlanta. To this day, I've never met him in person, but he has written books about musicians. He's co-written books about people with health issues. He's co-written book with Arnold Palmer. So he's written about sports and music, and he's a dad who couldn't have kids and adopted kids of his own. So I felt like he had a unique personal experience with a lot of different things I wanted this book to be about. And we met every Monday night for a year. And I would write, some days I would write 10 words. Some weeks I would write 10 words and send them to him. Some weeks I would write 10,000 words. And then we would get together and kind of piece it all together. If you've seen the movie The Beautiful Mind, A Beautiful Mind, there's a scene where he's got string connecting all of these note cards. And that's kind of how we work together is we want to tell this story chronologically, but he would say, Matt, here's a good point. I told him, hey, I'm reading this book right now. And it really made me think about that. And he's like, well, I think you should incorporate the book you're reading into the book. And so there's a book by Viktor Frankl called The Man's Search for Meaning that I wrote about in my book because I was reading it while I was writing the book. And he said, let's put that in right here. And the biggest compliment, his name is Steve Eubanks. The biggest compliment I can give Steve is there were parts of the book where he helped me connect two different ideas, and I couldn't tell where my writing stopped and his writing started. But it took us about a year to get there. And I would say this if, well, I don't know if I was gonna say, I would say this if Steve were on the call, but that's probably not true. Steve's not very funny. And so he would write things that I could tell him he was kind of making a joke, but I didn't think his joke was funny. And so I had to learn not to let Steve try to interject his humor. And it's okay if you don't think that I'm funny, but I had my sense of humor that I wanted in the book. Whether people agree with like that or not is okay with me. But I didn't want Steve's sense of humor to be in the book. And his sense of humor was just a little bit cheesier and more like, a little bit cheesier. And so we talked through that, and so it was a great experience because Steve and I connected in so well. But I could have seen working with a co-writer and working with an editor could be really frustrating experience if you don't have people that either get you or so Steve got me, and Elizabeth, my editor, we are not close, but she knew exactly what buttons to push to make the book better. And so that's what I wanted out of an editor, is somebody that's going to say, I think this needs more. This is what the book is missing. I didn't need an editor to say, hey, it's great. I needed somebody to say, you need to do more here. So I was very fortunate, and I interviewed the editor as well. I mean, I probably wasn't going to say no because it's not like I had a line of publishers around the corner. But I interviewed her because I wanted to make sure if I'm sharing my life with you over the next 4 years, I want to make sure you're somebody who's I'm going to be able to connect with on this.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Another question, and again, I think you've touched on this throughout tonight's talk, but could you talk a little bit about the anxiety of sharing your story and maybe how you dealt with some of that fear, some of that anxiety around doing it so openly, so publicly?
I didn't have any, and other people kept saying to me, I can't believe you're so willing to like do that. And then the day after it dropped, I thought every single person, it wasn't that I'm not comfortable sharing. I just usually get to pick and choose the audience. I get to choose when, I get to choose where, and I can adapt what I choose to share based on the environment. I'm guessing some of you, I'm not the only one here that's had that dream where you go to school in your underwear. And I felt like the day after it dropped, I was walking around school in my underwear because I thought all at once, every neighbor, every family member, every high school, college, coworker, past girlfriends, like everybody in my life knows pretty much everything I have to share all at the same time. And I wasn't quite I underestimated how overwhelming that feeling is. When you're walking down the street and the high school librarian says, oh my goodness, my husband and I were really struggling when we went, and you're like, I forgot that the high school librarian now knows about struggles in my marriage. I wasn't mentally prepared to have that exposure all at once. So that was a lot. And I would, I don't know how you can, even if you try to prepare for it, it's still different. But I would say one really uh, wonderful, unexpected, like privilege, and it's almost sweet is not the right word, but like endearing thing that has come out of that is having people I have never met email me or find me on Instagram or LinkedIn or Facebook and share really meaningful personal things about losing a child or dealing with cancer. And I never in a million years thought people would reach out to me or feel comfortable sharing their experience with me. And that has been, I like the word serendipity, which I think I even mentioned in the book. But the word serendipity meaning an unexpected gift. And so it has been an unexpected gift to have done something where other people feel comfortable sharing with me, even though I don't know them, sharing with me some really personal things in their life. Um, and I think that's just a positive outcome of kind of putting out into the world what you try to be a real thing and getting back from others what is a very real thing. And that's been a great experience for me.
That's great.
We are pretty close to time, so we should probably call it on the questions. But I just want to thank Matt again. Here, I'll remove you from the spotlight, Matt, so you don't have to be all alone in the big screen. And now we can see some of the other folks that have been with us tonight. That was fantastic. It was so fun to listen to, having read the book. And so I hope anyone who hasn't read it yet is encouraged now to go and pick up a copy or get it on Audible. I actually have read it, but now I really want to listen to it too. So I'm probably going to do that also. So thank you very much to Matt for being here tonight with us. Just a few housekeeping notes to kind of wrap us up tonight. So first of all, these meetups are being managed by the CTF Engage team here at CTF. So that includes myself and Emily, who is asking our questions tonight, as well as Alana, who's not here with us tonight. So be sure to subscribe to the meetup calendar so that we're dropping a bunch of links in the chat right now. So be sure to go over there and check them out if you don't have this stuff. But you can subscribe to our Google Calendar, and that will let you know when these events are coming up. Of course, also, we're hoping you're getting our emails. And if you are not receiving emails from us about these meetups and what we call the NF2 news, please email us at nf2@ctf.org so that we can make sure that you are on the mailing list and getting the information that we want you to have. Our next meetup is going to be May 22nd. We're going to be hearing from 2 NF researchers about some really fabulous work they're doing that really elevates the voice of the people in this community and your lived experiences in a way that can influence the future of research in NF2. So if you want to register for that one on May 22nd, that registration link is in the chat as well. I just want to give a quick plug for our Share Your Story option at CTF. So Matt spoke really beautifully tonight about the power of sharing your story. And if you don't, have any immediate plans to publish a book, then you might consider visiting ctf.org, and then it's /stories of NF. And again, links are all in the chat. Where you can either type up or record your own story. And we love to, you'll hear from someone on our staff if you submit something about what we might want to do with that story to really draw attention and awareness to this community. If you've indicated interest in becoming an NF2-SWN Accelerator or learning more about the program, you will be hearing from someone after our call, probably in the next week. And again, just a quick reminder, be sure to reach out to us if you don't receive our emails so that we can make sure you're all signed up. So, sorry, that was a lot of housekeeping. Go ahead, Matt.
I have one quick thing to add is I want to thank you guys for being here, and not just for tonight, but also CTF for putting this together. It was not long ago that even the idea of having closed captioning at an NF event seemed like a good idea. Like it was, yeah, that's something that we should work on. And so, and we all know that NF2 kind of got lumped in with NF1 for a long time. And it just means a lot to me. And I think to everybody on this call for NF2 to have its own space and for CTF to support that and create that, because this has not ever existed before. You know, this is still a very new thing. But also credit to everybody, all of you guys on this call, because if you didn't use your voice and you didn't raise your hand to say, hey, we need these, or you didn't show up to things like these, we wouldn't have them. So there, you might not think of it this way, but there's a very real level of self-advocacy by showing up at events like this. So thank you for being here on behalf, thank you from me on behalf of being here and advocating for NF2, and thanks for CTF for creating a space like this.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, for being here and for saying that. And I couldn't agree with you more that you guys are the reason that these things are changing, and the advocacy and the way that you're stepping up and sharing and, you know, demanding what you deserve to have in terms of access, and all of that is why we're here. So thank you for all of you being here tonight. And we'll hopefully see you on May 22nd. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.